Hey, hi, how you doing? It's Panthers beat reporter Mike Kaye, and I am joined by Alex Zietlow. And well, Alex, it's been a pretty busy 24 hours as the Panthers prepare to start their 2025 training camp. This is the Processing Blue podcast, which, if you tuned in to listen to people talk about computer programming, you're in the wrong place. This is a podcast about the Carolina Panthers, and, it sometimes you have days where you're like, things are going swell until like 3 o'clock and the news breaks, but it's news that is not particularly promising. You go through all these interviews, you have all these discussions with let's say a GM named Dan Morgan, and you talk to Nick Scorton and you talk to Robert Hunt, all the pizzazz of everybody's back to school. Well, here comes the hammer. And Alex, you were working on a story throughout this afternoon diligently on Josey Jewell, who has been released by the Carolina Panthers after one season, um, with with a failed physical designation. He is dealing with concussion symptoms. What type of insight can you give us about where Josey's status is beyond being released and why the Panthers made this move?
Yeah, so going back to your point about me or about being a slow day prior, I was looking up how to purchase a cat because Nick Scorton talked about his wonderful. I just looked it up. The breed is called a Maine Coon cat. It's the largest domesticated cat breed. It kind of looks like a scary miniature lion. But anyway, that's what I was
Well, now they
doing.
need a brand new cat at linebacker, so tough
Yeah,
beat.
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, no. So I was doing all that. And then word got around that Josey Jewell was released by the Carolina Panthers, as you said. And I started working on that story. Just a couple notes about that story. According to a team spokesperson, Josey Jewell had a say in this decision. And as far as I can tell, what that say was essentially he came and approached the front office people and essentially said, "Hey, I am still recovering from this concussion, and I do not want to take up a roster spot and take up valuable reps while I'm still recovering from this injury." And so the Panthers ultimately decided to release him and cut him. There are several contract and money implications from this. So the Panthers elected to cut him as opposed to putting him on the physically unable to perform list. If he was put on the PUP list, he was still entitled his $4.7 million base salary in 2025. Now that he was cut, he's only going to be delivered the $2 million in guaranteed money. And then he also has a couple other money implications that Mike, you can speak on. But yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, he's no longer on the Panthers roster. This doesn't mean that they can't bring him back necessarily if he does recover and the team doesn't replace him at the position. But just generally speaking, this is devastating for a guy, like you said, who's only 30 years old, and no one wants to see these concussion injuries. Mike, you did set me up just now with a whole bunch of information, but just generally, I wanted you to weigh in. What are your initial thoughts about this Josey Jewell news?
Sure. So if I can rewind a little bit, if he would have been put on the PUP active list, he would have been eligible to come off at any point, but he still would have counted against the roster. Just as Jonathan Brooks, there was a bit of a controversy with him in that they put him on the PUP list immediately and it still counted against the roster. So it was kind of a pointless move. Um, from that standpoint, it sounds like, based on what you're saying and some of the conversation I've had, he's basically just getting his $2 million guarantee because he was injured last season, suffered a concussion in the Week 16 win over the Arizona Cardinals, didn't play again. Has clearly been dealing with this for a while. I don't think they expected to make this decision today, given that the social media account posted a now deleted tweet of him arriving and saying like how great it is that he's back. But this isn't a funny matter. This is a situation where a guy is still pretty early in life and dealing with head injuries. We know that surrounds football and that's a topic. But good on him for taking, the right steps to feel better, whether that's, lip service or not. I mean, I think it's the right decision for him. It's the right decision for the Panthers. As you know, if you've been listening to this podcast, I don't want to, knock a guy while he's down. I didn't think Josey Jewell particularly played fantastic last year, so I don't know if this is a massive issue from a talent perspective. But what I will say from a mental perspective and a leadership perspective, it is a massive loss because there isn't a guy on this team that has worn that green dot consistently and knows this defense like Josey Jewell. He was pretty well liked in the locker room as well. And so I think this is a situation where they're going to have to kind of figure it out. Look, they like both of their undrafted rookies that they signed. Everybody's going to be like, well, they didn't draft anybody. I think if the board shook out differently on day 1 and day 2, there would have been an inside linebacker amongst this group, maybe instead of Gordon or Princely, even though they both really like those guys. Scott Martin is the guy that kind of headlines that twosome, and I think he's a guy that you're going to want to watch throughout camp. Claude Charles, who's mostly a special teams ace, he's a guy that got some defensive snaps last year and looked pretty promising before he suffered a toe injury that led to a procedure in the offseason. He's fully recovered. John Radigan's more of a special teams ace, but the guy that I want to talk about is Christian Roseboom.
Yep.
And you highlighted this in your story and your write-up. When I talked to Dan Morgan and Dave Canales in March at the owners' meetings, they were emphatically praising this guy and really excited about this guy. I think there's a moment in Blueprint where Canales is trying to sell the room on Roseboom instead of, somebody like Ejiro Avero who was worked with him, right? And so it's going to be really interesting. He's kind of like a heat-seeking missile type. He's a guy like Pete Hansen seems to like seek and destroy linebackers. That's what he is. I understand the optics of all this. Like, the Panthers had to know he was dealing with these woes in the concussion protocol. And so you say, well, just Christian Roseboom. But Roseboom started quite a few games last year, showed some promise. I think they feel really good about Trevin Wallace. Remember, I've told you this several times. They want to move Trevon Merrick around a lot. And so I could see them using just 3 linebackers, 1 inside linebacker, and 2 pass rushing outside linebackers more often than you probably think. That said, it doesn't kind of excuse, like, this kind of just came out of nowhere on the surface. And, like, Trevin Wallace is a guy who's got a lot of promise and upside, but, who knows, right? And he's going to be tasked with being that number 1 guy. He and Josey Jewell got along really well. And I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic in that linebacker room. You mentioned in your article guys like Kaiser White and Mike and Eric Kendricks and Jawan Bentley. Those guys have all played. They're all still out there, and they're all still out there for a reason. So we'll see kind of what happens with this linebacker position. But this isn't the only injury that they're technically monitoring. Before I get into that, Alex, do you have anything else to add about Josey?
Well, I was going to talk about the corresponding move that the Panthers made with Josey. I don't know if you want to skip into that, but before I do that, yeah, you talked about Josey Jewell's at times struggles last year. For the story, I looked at his stats: 97 total tackles, and this is in 12 games played and 12 games started. 97 total tackles, 3.5 sacks, an interception, and 2 fumble recoveries. I don't think. It didn't register to me that he was that productive last year, which is interesting. I mean, it wasn't great. It wasn't great production. I'm not saying it was like remarkable. I'm just saying, like, in only 12 games, that's not nothing.
No, I think he was. There's a difference between being productive and having a good year, in my opinion. Like, the one interception he had was like the most like incredible interception ever and probable. Remember in he had that great game in Germany against the Giants where he had like that.
Oh, that was a great. Yeah, that was a good
game. Like, I mean, I think he had really good moments. I think that first 6 weeks of the season was kind of rough. And that said, to his credit, he had a defensive line that was routinely backing up into him and probably played a factor in him not being as talented of a run defender, etc. Whatever. I'm not like bashing the guy. I think he was fine last year, but I think this is one where like people are acting like it's not like they lost Luke Kuechly. Is all I'm trying to say. They didn't lose Shaq Thompson again for the third time. Like this is a player who is a starting caliber NFL player, and he's fine. You know what I mean? Like I think that's what it is.
Absolutely. Let's go to the other injury.
Yeah. So just to run down the list, I'm going to run down the list, and then you're going to take it from there. Okay. Cool. So Monday they got ahead of it, and they put Tommy Tremble, who's coming off that back surgery, and Dan Chizina on the physically unable to perform list. Alex, I believe you reported that he had a calf injury, right? Dan Chizina?
Yes.
Okay. And then they put punter Sam Martin on the non-football injury list. As I reported, he has a hamstring injury. I don't expect him to miss a lot of time, but the reality is he's going to miss some time. So those three guys, I mean, that's still a pretty small, pre-training camp injury thing, obviously taking Josey Jewell aside. What did you gather from talking to Dan Morgan about those injuries today?
I gathered that they were, pretty minor, pretty injuries that won't really be consequential when it comes to this training camp. I mean, you asked him, are you going to add another punter? And he was like, no, the jugs machine will take care of that.
But I love that. And machines are really taking over.
Yeah, you're right.
Connor was right.
Yeah. So I didn't really glean all that much from Dan Morgan when discussing these injuries. It's difficult for Dan Chizina to go through this calf injury because we know how crowded that wide receiver room is, and he's going to be a guy that would really benefit from playing well on during training camp and proving that he's invaluable as a special teams guy. Because that's where he would. That's how we would make this team essentially. And as far as Tommy Tremble, nothing really all that surprising there. And then outside of those three guys, we got good news about Derek Brown being cleared for all team activities come training camp, and will essentially have no load management, though Dan Morgan did add that the team is going to be smart about how they use him just so he can ramp up effectively and smartly. But outside of that, that's pretty much all I got on these injuries. I mean, like, we just got to be careful that the jugs machine isn't going to take everyone's job one day.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right? They signed in a corresponding move with Josey Jewell getting released. Former Seahawks tight end Tyler Mabry, I believe is how you pronounce it.
Uh-huh.
He was kind of on and off the practice squad in Seattle for several years. He worked with Havoc Fearson. He worked with Dave Canales and Brad Isaac, yada, 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 yada. He's here to take reps with Tommy Tremble sidelined. I wouldn't read too much into it. But there is a tight end who's doing more than taking on reps this summer, and I think he's actually well positioned if Tommy Tremble has to miss a lot of time to be potentially the number 3 tight end at worst in this offense. You and I sat down a couple of weeks ago with James Mitchell, a former Detroit Lions draft pick who was signed with the team back in January. And we wanted to get his story because we like to highlight underdogs heading into training camp. And I think that James Mitchell's story is worth hearing. We are joined by Carolina Panthers tight end James Mitchell. James, you signed here in January on a reserve deal. What drove you to kind of leave Detroit after 3 years, sign here? And also, how has your offseason been going in your first year in Carolina?
Yeah, so to answer your first question, I had 3 great seasons in Detroit. I learned a lot. I was drafted there. I'm very thankful for my time there. Like I said, I learned a lot, met some great people. When I sat down with Jason, my agent, we just kind of decided that it may be a good time to kind of go in a different direction. He reached out to people and we got some interest from a few teams. And then as far as Carolina goes, we just kind of observe the whole situation and, the offense and, what would be a little kind of similar to what we did in Detroit and something that would be too different and, something that I would be able to pick up. So that's ultimately what led me to Carolina. It's ironic because it is like one of the closer teams to where, I'm from. So that's also a plus. Off season is going good. I spent my like spring before OTAs and summer right now in Florida in Sarasota training at Athletic Edge. It's been great. I feel like I'm as strong as I've ever been, explosive as I've ever been. Also, the heaviest I've ever been, but I'm feeling good. I'm moving well. So I'm excited for the season.
You're actually one of the more experienced tight ends on the roster, it turns out. Just curious, like, what has the offseason, what has that room been like? Obviously, Tommy's dealing with the back injury, but what has the room been like, and how have you been able to kind of carve out your role, whether as somebody in the locker room the guys can come to and on the field?
I think it's unique, with the tight end room that we have. It was kind of like that in Detroit as well. We weren't very old, like a lot of guys were young. So I think that just allows all of us to kind of learn from each other and, just pick each other's brains. There's no egos in the room. Everybody's open and willing to learning and trying new things that maybe works for another guy. And, me playing in a different place for the past 3 years, there's things maybe that I've seen that I can help them with. So, and they know that. I made that clear to them. So, I think that's pretty cool. As far as my role, I've just been trying to keep my head down, working. A lot of stuff is going to happen over the course of the next month. Just trying to set the example. I'm a hardworking guy. I'm a quick learner. So just kind of setting that precedent. That I'm going to come in and, do whatever they ask of me.
So James, one of the first things that I think a lot of people read about you is that you have a nickname, and you're and so can you explain the backstory behind your nickname, the Governor?
Yeah. So I knew that question was going to come. So back at Virginia Tech going into my senior year, I was watching film with one of our coaches and they had just got out of like a staff meeting and, he was pulling up the film for me. He was like, yeah, I just told the whole offensive staff that once you're done playing that you're going to run for governor and I'm going to run all your campaigns. Like he just said it randomly. So then a lot of the offensive staff started calling me Gov and I was like, okay, like whatever. And then I come off of practice one day and one of the coaches was like, he called me the governor and he was like, you should start putting that on all your like tweets, like through Virginia Tech. So we told the media guy kind of as like a joke. And then he tweeted it out that night. And then I come back in the next day at team meeting, like everybody was like calling me the governor. And like it just ended up sticking. They start calling me that on ESPN, like the first game of the year. They called me that on the broadcast. So it just kind of stuck, I guess.
Are any of your Panthers teammates calling you Gov yet? Or because I mean, Tershawn Wharton, his name is Turk, essentially. Are they calling you? Are they calling you Gov, or is it still James?
It's still James right now. I don't think I haven't earned that yet, and I don't think a lot of them know, quite frankly. So I'm still I got to earn that.
Yeah, but you talk about Virginia Tech and you talk about your cabinet of sorts. You played with actually a lot of guys you're playing with now. Like,
That's true.
I mean, who's gonna be the whistleblower here for the governor? I mean, like you've got Josh Nijman, who you played with early in your career. Then you got Amari Barno and Raheem Blackshear, I believe you guys were all part of the same draft class, right?
Yeah, me, Raheem, and Barno. Actually, now that you say that, Raheem does call me the governor all the time, and everybody
Be the one. I feel yeah. I feel like
I try to be. I'll just shake my head and he calls me that. Right? Yeah, he calls me that all the time, and he'll tell everybody that's around. So I gotta give him a shout out though.
Yeah. I think something that's like kind of interesting. You mentioned kind of the proximity to Charlotte, being from Big Stone Gap. Not a lot of NFL players come out of there. I know you have the basketball background. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about what got you to this point, from AAU basketball to, getting recruited to Virginia Tech to here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like you said, I love basketball. My mom actually played at Brown University. So basketball was always kind of what I wanted to pursue. I love football. basketball was just like my favorite. But at the same time, I knew that this is what I wanted. I wanted to be a professional athlete, and I was going to take whatever path gave me the best shot. And after my freshman year of football, Virginia offered. I still was like, I still want to be a basketball player. I played with Boo Williams that spring. Um, and then like my sophomore year, junior year, bigger teams started, calling, coming to the school to visit. And my football coach actually told me I was shooting basketball just like after school one day. And my football coach came in and was like, somebody from the Big Ten had called and he was like, you need to just put the basketball down, just like joking. Like I was still going to play, but like in school ball. But yeah, so ultimately, the opportunities came in football more so than basketball. And that's ultimately why I chose this route.
Yeah, that's great. People on the podcast and people who listen to our press conferences know that I bring up basketball way too much. And
it was my turn this time. It was my turn.
James, you tore your ACL in 2021 and then got drafted in 2022. Some players in the Panthers locker room right now are living or have lived a similar story.
Right.
I'm curious, how difficult was it to bounce back from that knee surgery and get acclimated to NFL life?
Yeah, it was very hard. It was a hard journey. I think for me, with deciding to go ahead and go to the draft after doing that, it was a little bit of a different journey for me because, I started my rehab at Virginia Tech. Then once I graduated, I went on to Pensacola. And then obviously when I got drafted, I went to Detroit. So, everybody kind of wanted to do their own thing as far as ACL rehab goes. So I might have been at a different pace. And then they would kind of dial it back when I got to a new place. So that mentally kind of felt like, not like you were starting over, but it's just like, man, like, you feel kind of stagnant with having to go back, and then you start gaining progress and you go back, and then get to Detroit and don't do anything in the spring besides meetings and rehab. And then I think the second week of the preseason, we had joint practices against Indy, and that was my first live week. So you can imagine how that goes, like your first week, real practice and NFL joint practices. And, so it was tough. And I think about midway through the year is kind of when I feel like I got my footing, just coming from college to the NFL without getting that spring. But yeah, it's tough. It's a very mentally straining journey, but I think you learn a lot about yourself through those times as well.
Yeah, and just to quickly follow up, that's what I was going to ask about. Is that the defining obstacle of your football career to date?
I believe so. Yeah, just because even going into my senior year at Tech, it was going to be a big year for me. I was excited. I was once again at that point, the strongest, fastest, whatever I've been in my career, and I was really looking forward to it. And to have that taken away 2 games into the year, it was devastating. And then rehabbing and getting back, and then kind of getting blindsided by the NFL. But I would definitely say that is the pivotal moment of my career today.
James, I was just curious, like, you have this 3-year career. You did have the ups and downs with the injury. Do you have like a defining play from your first 3 years in the league that can kind of tell fans, like, look this up and then you'll understand my game?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. Now you put me on the spot.
Well, take us through the touchdown in Green Bay.
Yeah, so the touchdown in Green Bay, it was just it was like I had a back line, a basic. I was actually probably like maybe the third read on it, and it just literally just popped open. Yeah, I caught it in the back of the end zone. Like I think I just like blacked out on that touchdown. Like after I caught it, there was another little play, and I think we were playing the Bills on Thanksgiving. I just caught like a simple little like check down, took it for like 20 or 30, and like I felt like that like shows what I can do like with the ball in my hands. Like I still feel like I'm a good athlete with the ball in my hands. And then the year after that, I think a couple in the preseason games, just catching like simple passes and showing my ability after the catch.
So like with Mitchell Evans, like when you watch his tape, he catches the ball and he's breaking that first tackle. Would you say that that's pretty similar? Like Tommy Tremble's kind of the same way, like kind of a catch and then break a tackle and pick up some extra yards type of guy?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I can be that. I feel like physical. I'm a physical runner, hard to tackle, but also am deceptively quick. I'm not slow by any means, but I would definitely say I'm the similar type.
Has a coach ever yelled out like Mitchell in the middle of the practice, and then you guys don't know whether it's you or Mitchell Evans?
Well, I think Mitchell knows, but me. So in Detroit, they called me Mitch. So like I'm so used to whenever they say Mitch, I go run. So Coach Pat, he'll say Mitch for Mitchell Evans, and I'll like hesitate, and he'll be like, "Not you," but he calls me James right now, so I just have to get used to it.
So
But it
what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen when Pat watches this podcast, and then your first practice, he goes, "Hey, Zietlow kind of broke the news that you're the governor." Like, what's gonna happen? Like,
he'll probably give me a fine if we're being honest, but I could see
that's
him.
very gubernatorial. I mean, that's
Yeah, but I could see him, joking around, calling me that. So we'll see.
Well, yeah, no, this nickname is not only funny, but it's also practical, clearly.
Yeah.
James, it's not an interview with an offensive player without at least talking about Bryce Young. He's coming off a pretty great final stretch last year. I know you haven't spent a ton of time with him, but what have your initials impressions of him been so far?
Yeah. I'll say the first thing that sticks out to me about him is he's just like, first of all, he's very calm. No matter good play, bad play, whatever, he's level-headed. He's never going to get too high or too down on himself. And he's a great leader, very well spoken in the huddle. Coming up to guys on the sideline, whatever it is, he's just very well spoken, and I appreciate that about him. And he's got a heck of an arm. Obviously, like you said, I haven't spent a lot of time with him, but I have gotten to. I sit back and watch, and then I did get a few shots in there with the ones in spring and caught some balls from him. And, he makes great throws, great plays. He can get out of the pocket. So, I'm just excited to continue to hopefully, grow that connection with him and, see him work and continue to build off of what he did last year.
James, thanks for joining us on the Processing Blue podcast, and good luck this summer. Fans that want to keep track of James's performance throughout the summer and the rest of the squad during training camp, you can find daily jam-packed training camp notebooks from Alex and myself on charlotteobserver.com starting on July 23rd.
All right, appreciate you guys.
That conversation with James Mitchell, we want to thank him again. Some really interesting stuff, obviously from nearby, has the Virginia Tech, draw with Amari Barno and Raheem Blackshear and Josh Nijman. He's an interesting player. What was your biggest takeaway from that interview?
The governor. The Gov.
Yeah, Blackshear still it's a good nickname. You're one for a good nickname. That's you. Sorry, I didn't mean to get you off.
Yeah, no. I wanted you to respond. Raheem Blackshear actually calls him that as he said in the interview, which is funny, back from his Virginia Tech days. He's a guy who is the most veteran guy in this tight end room, which is kind of remarkable considering the fact that he's only 25. And yeah, he could really make a splash. He had a good run in Detroit, although on limited opportunities, and he's going to have to make most of the opportunities here. I really enjoyed working with him or talking to him, and, good luck to him in training camp. We always see these training camp heroes emerge, and whether they make the initial 53-man roster or not, they're compelling stories. Among those guys was Damani Richardson last year, and he is now going to be counted on this year as a safety. Another guy who was a training camp hero, at least in my eyes last year, was tight end Jordan Matthews. And he kind of toggled between the practice squad and the active roster all of last year. That was because of, in my opinion, a lot of variables out of his control, with the team wanting to develop a lot of young talent. But he played himself onto an NFL roster last year. So, maybe James Mitchell can be this year's training camp hero. Who knows?
Well, that's my youngest son, Reese, rooting for him in the background. So we've been doing this segment since we came back from summer break, called two things can be true. And I think it's a good one entering training camp because, it's funny. We haven't really talked about Bryce a ton, right? Like, he's one of the more underpublicized quarterbacks in the league for a lot of reasons. But
It took us not to cut you off, Mike, but it took us what, 10 whole minutes of talking to Dan Morgan to bring up Bryce Young. Like, I that hasn't happened since Bryce has gotten here.
Which I think is kind of weird because he's in this spot where he definitely needs to prove it this year, but also we know what he kind of is.
Right.
So it's a weird spot. So with that said, two things can be true. Dave Canales needs to let Bryce Young cook and do the things that he does well, as in scrambling and improvising and throwing the ball down the field, as we saw in that last 8-week stretch. But Bryce Young needs to show that he can fully ingratiate himself and control and, champion and, master the offensive playbook, both before and after the snap. I think that was one of the biggest issues last year. It felt like a slow plodding offense, mostly because it felt like after the huddle, at least in those first, his first 2 games, it just kind of seemed hodgepodge. He needs to be able to run this joint. Like, that's just the fact. Like, we talked about promise and proof, right? He showed promise last year. He needs to show proof this year that was not a fluke, that was who he is, that's what he can do. And I think in order for him to do that, Canales needs to empower him to do whatever he needs to do. But in turn, with that promise, Bryce needs to show that he is completely bought into the offense, that he has mastered it. He knows it like the back of his hand. He can make checks. He can do everything he needs to do to make this an agreeable partnership and a success on the field. What do you think of that?
I think it's fair. I think it's great. I wanted to ask you this. So, at the end of the season when Bryce Young was playing really well, he was able to put together 4 quarters of consistent, explosive football. However, he, particularly right after the bye, he would start games really well. When the plays were perfectly scripted for him, perhaps when the defense didn't exactly know what was coming or the score was relatively even, he had real mastery or if not mastery, competence in the offense. I'm curious if that plays at all into your two things can be true thing of letting him cook. You initially, was he kind of held back, you think, after that first initial series, after the plays that were scripted were kind of ran out?
Well, typically your scripted plays are your best plays.
Okay.
So, if you're mastering those in practice, you know them pretty well, right? I think for him, it needs to show in, the way he leads the offense, the way he lines guys up, the way he figures out, what he's doing. And I thought he did a really good job of that in the second half of the season. You just have to continue with it. They're going to add wrinkles to this offense. And I think he grew exponentially. And I think that, there was a time... after one of the games, I think it was after Philly, that Canales said, Bryce saved my bacon, because he knew what to do and whatever. A good quarterback is able to do that. And I think we saw the maturation of Bryce, at least from that standpoint. I'm just saying this needs to be a continuation. What about you? What's your two things can be true?
Mine is pretty topical. Two things can be true. Trevin Wallace is still a bit of an unknown, but he'll probably still be the top linebacker heading into the season. Who across the league knows the Trevin Wallace name? If you talk to a lot of casual Panthers fans, I think there's some less than casual Panthers fans will be like, "Hey, is Shaq Thompson still on the team?" That is the last really well-known inside linebacker that the Panthers had, and so Trevin Wallace is a second-year linebacker, like we talked about. He wore the green dot actually a couple times, or he had the green dot a couple times last season, which essentially means he relays the play calls from the sideline to the rest of the defense a few times last year. And that was when Josey Jewell and Shaq Thompson were both out at the same time. He's a great character. He has a thick country accent, which players commented on. It actually made it hard to hear the play calls and understand the play calls coming from the sideline, but that was just a little funny thing. He can be really productive. He can bounce all the way around the field. The question is going to be, can he consistently do so, and can he really understand this scheme? But he's probably going to be the best linebacker that the Panthers have on this team, unless if Christian Roseboom proves that he is leaps and bounds beyond him, because of course the Panthers invested a lot in Trevin by taking him in the third round of the 2024 draft. So I've always been high on Trevin, and I love talking to him. He's got something like 4 goats. He loves Dragon Ball Z. He loves.
You think one of the goats is named Goat Coup?
That would be wonderful. That truly would be.
That's like the length of my Dragon Ball Z and farm animal knowledge.
Zach Dennis is right across from me, and he's shaking his head. But yeah, what you think about that? Do you think Trevin Wallace will be the number 1 linebacker heading into the season?
I thought last summer he was the most intriguing and interesting player at training camp. I thought he moved really well in space. Once they got into pads, it was a little different. But then, I thought he played well. And then he didn't play for 2 weeks because Shaq Thompson was ahead of him, Josey Jewell was ahead of him. And then they asked him to start right away. And I think the learning curve was kind of tremendous. And, he's coming off a shoulder injury. He's an unknown, but I'm a big believer in him. I liked him as a prospect. I think he makes a lot of sense for what they do. He's very athletic. He's a seek and destroy guy, as we said. He's very vocal. I don't think he's going to be intimidated taking on the green dot. It's just a matter of whether he can function with it. And I like Roseboom's makeup. I'm not going to lie and say, they're going to be fine. I mean, I do think Josey Jewell's a loss. I don't think it's like this, oh my gosh, run for the hills sort of thing. But, yeah, I mean, I agree. I think he is easily the most talented linebacker on the roster. So I think him being the top guy makes a lot of sense. And sometimes, you've got a GM who's a linebacker. If anybody can relate and kind of prepare him, at least mentally, I think Dan Morgan's got a good head on his shoulders about it. And I don't get the sense that they're fretting this. It's been probably a pretty tough day in that organization, especially because you never want to see a guy deal with a head injury, especially a prolonged one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Trevin will be able to stand up. He seems like a pretty mature guy and a guy who has the energy to kind of boost everybody around him. But with that said, make sure that you are following Alex and myself on X. Make sure you are signing up for the Axis Panthers newsletter, which starting in the preseason will be twice a week. This week and next week, it will be once a week coming straight to you on Monday. Also, make sure you are just staying on top of all the great stuff that we've got going on CharlotteObserver.com. Tuesday, we published a story about the inner workings of the analytics department. I think that's something that we can all kind of learn a little bit more about everybody else's job in the front office. And I tried to kind of portray that in this story. Got a lot of really good feedback about it. Thank you. So check that out. We also have a story on AC Carter talking about all the outside linebackers, if you want to take your mind off of inside linebackers for a couple of moments. And we'll have detailed notebooks throughout the week, including Alex's from this morning or from Tuesday morning with Dan Morgan. But yeah, Alex, send us home.
Thanks as always for listening to our pontification on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach Dennis. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to CharlotteObserver.com for all of your Panthers needs Mike, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
That's a wrap.